week of house parties. I hope you guys are having so much fun. If we haven't met before, my name is Kathy Davidson. I serve on our college ministries staff. And before we get any further, I'm very pregnant, which the table is conveniently hiding. But I say that to you, if I sound out of breath, it's because I am, and this baby is responsible for it, not me. So if you're annoyed at all at how out of breath I sound, take it up with the baby when he comes in August, okay? Now that we have that out of the way, I really am excited to be talking with you guys about fasting. It's our next spiritual discipline that we're looking at as we move through our summer of spiritual disciplines through house parties. So it's kind of ironic that I'm talking about fasting because I am actually probably the world's worst faster. And I say this like kind of laughing, but I feel really bad about it. So this is convicting, and writing this message was really convicting for me. Literally, I was working on it and my husband Matt was like, "What are you teaching on again?" I was like, "Fasting." And he was like, "Oh, are you sure you're the right one for that job?" So I have not been a good faster. I am resolved, especially after studying it this week, to get better at it. But just know I'm coming at it from a humble place, very teachable, and excited to learn with you guys as we talk about it tonight. But like I said, I am the world's worst faster. I've probably fasted a meal here or there, but never like a full day or even 2 days or a week. Heck no, I love food a little bit too much. Every Lent, I do fast from social media, but typically, at least once or twice, I make up a convenient excuse of why I need to go on and check something. So I break that fast. But the world's worst fast experience of my life was in January of 2015, I decided to give up Diet Coke. Now, unfortunately, if you know anything about me, you probably know that I love Diet Coke. And that's probably a problem, that's what you know about me. But I am very addicted, and it is a problem, and apparently Diet Coke is not good for you, which I still don't fully believe that, but whatever. On January 4th of 2015, I made the brave and courageous decision to give up Diet Coke for the entire year or more. I just didn't even have an end date. I said I'm just giving it up indefinitely. And to make it even more real and cement it even further, I posted this very dramatic video of me pouring out the last Diet Coke in my fridge, which is too good not to share, so enjoy. I know, it's the most ridiculous video. I should be ashamed of it, but I'm not because it's kind of funny to me, but whatever. The worst part was reading the comments after I posted it. Friend after friend was like, "Wow, Kathy, I never thought I'd see the day. You're so brave. Are you sure you can do this? Wow, I can't believe it. I know it's a big deal for you," which that's ridiculous, right? I can give up Diet Coke. Anyways, the worst part was I didn't give it up. As you guys know, I made it maybe a few weeks, maybe a month, I really can't even remember. But then I got pregnant and I got cranky and I said, "Give me back Diet Coke." So I gave back in. Now, I didn't give up Diet Coke for a spiritual reason there, but it showed me really quickly how addicted I was to it. Whether it was the next day waking up with a headache or just thinking about it throughout the day. That's ridiculous too, thinking about a drink that I want to have throughout the day. I sound like an alcoholic, except it's just a Diet Coke-aholic. Anyways, I was sad and kind of miserable without it. It was really obvious to me as soon as I started that fast how dependent I was on Diet Coke. And that's really the purpose of fasting, as I've come to understand it. Fasting helps us, it just reveals our dependence on things that are not of God. Whether it's on food or drink or things that we spend our time on, it reveals to us where we place our dependence and our reliance other than Jesus. And it gives us an opportunity to reset, push the reset button, and put our dependence and our reliance back on God instead of on something else. And so that is why it is important. But if you're like me, we probably don't fast very often. And if you do decide to give up something pretty quickly, you're breaking it for some reason or another because you lack self-control. Fasts are hard because they're not fun. Hear me tell you, they're not fun. They take discipline. And if you are not a naturally disciplined person, like myself, it's even harder for you. But the point of a spiritual discipline is to grow our faith, and growth does not ever come by something that's easy or fun. Spiritual disciplines make us do things that we wouldn't normally do. to grow us in our faith. And so it's called a discipline because like running or push-ups or working out, it's not fun. They take dedication and work, but like any other discipline, they are worth it. And that's why I'm excited to talk about it more with you guys, because as I've been studying it, the more and more I realize fasting helps us tremendously grow in our relationship with Jesus. So I am not the fasting pro, but I want to grow with you guys. So let's lean in and learn and see why fasting is important and how we should do it. So today we're going to talk about, see, I told you I'm out of breath, what fasting is, why we should do it, and how to do it. So what is fasting? Very simply, this is a definition. You should probably write it down. Fasting is abstaining from something in order to grow spiritually. That's it. It's abstaining from something in order to grow spiritually. And there's examples of fasting all throughout the Bible, Old and New Testament. The only example we see in Scripture is fasting from food or water, but we know that you can fast from many other things too. Lots of Bible characters fasted from Moses, David, Elijah, Esther, Daniel, Anna the prophetess in the New Testament, Paul, and then of course the fasting goat, Jesus. They varied in how long they fasted or why they fasted, but they all fasted. Some fasted on their own, and then some fasted with a group of people with a similar goal or purpose in mind. So you see a lot of fasting in the Bible. It's important. And like I said, in the Bible, it's only mentioned as going without food or water, but there are many other things that you can fast from. We can fast from food or our favorite beverages, like coffee or Diet Coke. We can fast from things that take up our time. Maybe it's social media or things that we love doing, like shopping or playing video games. Those are all things that we can fast from. So while the what of fasting may change, the purpose remains the same. To rid us of our dependence on anything that's not Jesus, and then to push the reset button so that we can rely more fully on God. So why? Why should we fast? And this is the really important, the important part of it that God's really been teaching me this week. Because as Christ followers, literally the one thing that we are asked and told and commanded to do, and again, it's all over Scripture, is to fully follow after God, to fully surrender and to obey and to depend on God. He wants us to follow Him and no one else. It's very clear. He wants us to follow Him wholeheartedly. He wants no other gods or idols worshipped ahead of Him. And while you and I might say, I don't have an idol in my life, I'm not bowing down to some weird golden calf, we really do have idols. An idol is anything that gets more of our attention or our thoughts or our time or our admiration or our love than God does. That's an idol. Anything that controls us is an idol. So if there's something that you think about that you're like, man, if I don't have that, I can't make it through the day, that's an idol. It's become an idol, and it's time to take a fast from it. And as crazy as it sounds, good things can become idols. It's just anything that we put too much of our thought, energy, time, admiration into, anything that we let control us, it can become an idol. So it can be food, which isn't a bad thing. It can be our common grounds addiction. It could be even sleep if we love sleep too much. Movies, Instagram, Xbox, all of those can be idols. And they're not necessarily bad things, but they can control us, and that's when it becomes bad. So even though we may not think about it that way, when we rely on those things to make us feel happy or content or satisfied or joyful or even sane, other than relying on God for those things, we've made it an idol. We are called to be reliant on God first and foremost for our satisfaction, our joy, our contentedness, our happiness. It needs to come from Him. And so anything that takes His place is our idol that we begin to worship instead of God. And so that is where fasting comes in handy, because it helps us to realize what we've become dependent on besides God. And it gives us a timeout, a moment, like I said, to push that reset button to refocus where our dependence should be. So fasting from food, it highlights your overdependence on a certain food or drink, or how much you've come to rely on needing food that your body really doesn't need at the time. And those hunger pains that you start to feel, when you feel those, you have to rely on God to make it through it. And so it takes this thing that you've put in God's place, this reliance on even something that you do need, food and drink, but an over-reliance on it gives you that break to then focus your reliance back on God where it should be in the first place. Fasting from things that take up your time, like Instagram or movies or whatever, that highlights how you've become dependent on those things to make you happy instead of God, or to fill up your time when you're feeling bored or low because you're not spending your time the way that you should. And so when you're fasting from those things and you start to feel bored, you're like, what am I supposed to do with myself? Then you spend that time with God and you allow Him to fill up that empty space inside of you. Emptying the space that you've filled with things of this world so that you can fill up on the only thing that matters, God. That is fasting. That is why it is so important. It's emptying ourselves of the way that we have filled ourselves up in the past so that we can more fully fill up on Jesus. And that's a good thing. Because fasting shows us our idols and it gives us an opportunity to realign our worship. Isaiah 58 is a really terrifying chapter of the Bible. You should read it after this and spend some time praying through it. It's terrible. But it talks about fasting that the Lord detests. He says that He hates fasting that is all talk and no action. Because for God, true fasting should lead to a different way of life. So I'm going to kind of skim read some of it here. But then people say, well, why have we fasted and yet you have not seen it? Why have we humbled ourselves and you haven't noticed? Basically, like, why are we doing this if it doesn't matter to you? And then God says, yet on the day of your fasting, you do as you please. You exploit all your workers. Your fasting ends in quarreling and strife and striking each other with wicked fists. You cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. Is this the kind of fast that I have chosen? Only a day for people to humble themselves? Is that what you call a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? And God says, is not this the kind of fasting I've chosen? To loose the chains of injustice, untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry, to provide the poor wanderer with shelter, when you see the naked to clothe them, and to not turn away from your own flesh and blood? Ouch. Like I said, that chapter kind of stings. But God is very clear here that fasting needs to lead to a different way of living. If it is not accompanied by action, it is meaningless and He detests it. So it is very important that when we fast, we do it in a way so that we lead to a new way of living. Because again, fasting shows us where we've relied, where we've put our trust and our hope in things that are not of God. It gives us that time to realign our priorities, realign our heart of worship for God so that we can then fill ourselves up with God first. Fasting should lead to a new way of living. But how do we do it? Because I know that that is the question you're all thinking of. It's the question that I wrestle with too. It seems like this outdated thing. No one really talks about it. Or if they do, they say it in a way that you're like supposed to know what they're talking about. And you're like, no, actually, like, how do I do it? So there's a few pointers in Scripture that we learn. The first is to keep it quiet. Matthew 6 says that Jesus says that fasting should be done secretly and not in a way that draws attention to yourself. It's something between you and God, not between you and anyone else. So don't post your fast from Instagram on Instagram. I'm just saying. Sometimes, yes, you might need to explain it to a roommate or a friend or a spouse of like you're not eating dinner and they don't need to get worried about you. So yeah. Tell people if you need to, but if you don't need to tell anyone, don't tell them. Keep it between you and God. Don't draw attention to yourself. And then secondly, choose wisely what you fast from. We should all participate in food fasts because that's what we see in the Bible. And so even I am convicted to try that. Maybe not when I'm pregnant, but at some point in the near future. But when we fast from other things, like I said, things that take up our time or things that we become dependent on, we need to really think through and ask God, ask our community, hey, what are things that I'm putting too much reliance on other than God? Help me point those out so that I can fast from those. And God will reveal to you what He wants you to fast from if you ask Him. So choose wisely. Take inventory of how you spend your time, what you're filling your head with, and then decide to fast based off of that knowledge. Third, this is good advice I should have taken myself. Walk before you run. Perhaps the thing that like kept me from giving up Diet Coke back in 2015 was the fact that I went from having like 3 or 4 Diet Cokes a day to then saying, all right, I'm never going to have them again. Like, what? Set a goal. Maybe if I had said, oh, I'm going to go for 1 a week or even 1 a day and then down to 1 a week, like set smaller, more tangible goals. Because otherwise you're going to feel like a failure pretty quickly when you give in because you're not able to handle it. So train your body for your fast by doing it in smaller chunks and then building up into larger fasts. So don't try the 40-day fast off the bat unless you're Jesus. But I suspect you're not Jesus. And so if you aren't, try something small and then build towards a larger goal of fasting by walking before you run. And then fourth, finally, most importantly, when you fast, remember that you're doing it for spiritual reasons, right? I've given up things for Lent before, and I'm going to give up sugar. And it was really because I just needed to go on a diet and lose some weight, which is not like why you should fast. You're doing it for a spiritual reason. So if you give up something that sucks all your time and your thought, spend that extra time that you now have in scripture and prayer. If you give up food, spend the time that you normally be eating in prayer and worship and in scripture. If it's something that you just like, you're giving up something that you think about too much, spend that extra time thinking about God through devotion and prayer. The goal of fasting, like I've said, is to realign our dependence from other things to God. So as you fast, keep that as the goal. Whatever you give up, that time, that margin, that space, fill that with God. So we know what fasting is, why it's important, and how to do it. And my advice to you guys this week is just to try it. Let God be your coach. Let him help teach you and guide you on how to fast, what to fast from, and what he wants. He will be honored by your honest pursuit of that, I promise. So the goal for this week, you guys are going to talk about it in your groups tonight. It's just, hey, have you ever fasted before? How'd that go? And then what do you think God would call you to fast from for this next week? What is a fast that you could do that would be honoring to God and would help you realign that dependence? So I can't wait to hear what God teaches you through this. I'm excited to learn with you myself. And so come tell me what God's been teaching you about fasting, and I will do the same. All right, have a good week, guys. Thanks.